Well, there's definitely like a common theme emerging. Everyone's like, how do we come together? How do we come together? I mean, look around, you know what I'm saying? A lot of us just talking to your folks next to you that's standing, you know, look at the people next to you. You guys have the same power as anyone else in history ever had. You know, we can do this. You know what I'm saying? It's not like we can't wait for someone like, this is the common theme, right? We can't wait for someone up above to come swoop down and save us, be they politicians or union leaders. We are the leaders. We have to be the leaders or else we're screwed. If we as individuals are not leaders and taking personal responsibility to help our fellow co-workers and our fellow man, then we have died as a movement. We have to take responsibility and do that. We have to do it for ourselves. All of you have to do it. We all have to be leaders. You know what I'm saying? I don't have, and none of us have any more mental capacity than you guys do. Let's do this shit. Across the border, across the globe, we have to do it. We can't be atomized and nationalistic. It's an illusion. Scott and I got harassed by the police coming across the border, this imaginary line in the ground. You know, they searched our car and detained us for hours and questioned us and blah, 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 blah. I'm not kidding. Yeah, and it's just ridiculous. Why?
Democracy. Democracy in action.
Right, exactly. Quote, democracy, right? But it's just these lines and these borders and barriers are imaginary. We're the same species. We're the human fucking species. Let's start acting like it, right? That's it.
Well, a lot of what Sean was saying is based in truth. We need rank and file organizations. We need more democracy. Democracy and allowing the rank and file to dictate the direction of the union rather than the union dictating to the rank and file. And one of the biggest problems that we have in the UAW is a lack of democracy. A lack of democracy with our international, particularly on the local level. We have a little bit more democracy. We get to have elections and that matter. At our plant, the last two plant chairmen that supported bad contracts aren't plant chairmen anymore. So there can be results, but we have to empower the rank and file. And we have to work together in solidarity across union borders, across country borders. The brother that was asking about the lessons from CTU. The CTU won a 1-week strike. They really inspired a lot of people. But then after the strike was over, they turned around and the mayor of Chicago, a Democrat, the chief of staff from President Obama's first term of office, he went and closed 50 of the schools and starts outsourcing the schools, building charter schools in place of the closed neighborhood schools. Now what those do is they discriminate against the kids that are being left behind. The kids that are already struggling are going to be struggling more because the charter schools are selective in their choice of what students get to go in. So we're really breaking down the society by allowing that to happen. And one thing we need to do is get rid of Rahm Emanuel next time in Chicago. The fight for 15, we need to join with our brothers and sisters in the fast food and our Walmart. At the last time I spoke, I got to meet a brother, or not. I wasn't speaking, sorry. At the last conference I attended, I got to meet a brother from a Walmart warehouse in my neighborhood, you know, just a couple miles from where I live. He works there, and he was trying to organize his Walmart warehouse, and I reached out to him and asked him, how can I help? I'm on the Union Solidarity Committee. We want to reach out. We participated in the Black Friday boycott and rallies in front of the Walmart stores last year, last November. And we want to do more. We want to help you. I sent him an email, and I haven't heard much back from him yet. So, you know, that cooperation goes both ways. I guess I'll pass it on to Greg, because I'm sure he has some great thoughts for you.
I'd like to take the opportunity to cede some minutes to some people who traveled here a long ways, and I appreciate hearing from them. Lindsay Henshelwood, who ran in opposition to the president at Unifor. I saw a little clip of that from the convention. Very proud of her, very impressed. And the brother who nominated her, another brave brother, Bruce Allen. And then in the back row, Ron Lair, who came up from Detroit. So if I could see some time with them, I appreciate it. Or anyone else who missed.
Very notorious for being an overly critical person. Good friend of mine, and a good friend of Greg Shotwell's, who's no longer with us, a guy named Dave Yetta. Was the president of Local 599 in Buick City in Flint, Michigan. We lost him about 10 years ago, but not that long before then, I made a remark to him and he just loved it because he understood completely what I was saying. We used to meet all the time through the New Directions process that took place in the UAW. I said to him, in terms of commenting on what was happening in the CAW, that you could take measure of how the degeneration and the rot in the CAW by seeing how much it resembles what's going on in the UAW. And right now we're just about at the point where there's no difference. And I'm convinced, and this is where I differ with you guys to some degree, I'm convinced that we're way past the point of no return. The existing structures cannot be reformed. And I think an integral part of that is, and it's even more pronounced in the UAW, is that we have a leviathan in our organizations called the union, which I refer to as the union bureaucracy. And the people in the union bureaucracy are compensated at a rate worth over $250,000 a year each, if you add up the cost of their basic wage, their benefits, and their expenses. So what incentive do they have to want to see the existing structures change? I say they have no incentive whatsoever. And so you're up against this power structure comprised of people who are compensated at that rate and essentially guaranteed, if they stick with it long enough, to retire as millionaires. These people are totally, absolutely integrated into the system. And they are not going to break with the system. And the conclusion that's led me to is that we are unfortunately at a point where what we have to do is essentially blow up the existing structures and rebuild anew. There's no alternative. It's delusional to think that a structure was controlled by an apparatus filled with people with that kind of vested interest in the existing structure are going to change. And so I don't know how to go about that, but there is kind of an historical comparison. We remember, those of us who studied labor history, that prior to the 1930s in the United States there was the AFL, American Federation of Labor, and it was basically become ossified and it wasn't going anywhere. And the CIO emerged in kind of the vacuum left by the AFL and created an entirely new labor movement that, that rebuilt the labor movement by organizing mass industries. And that was largely based on the fact that these structures and the way in which the economy was organized had fundamentally changed as a result of the mass production system created by essentially created by Henry Ford. Well, we're past the mass production system, and we're now in economic systems. I mean, they talked about team concept and the like, which are all derived from the Toyota system, which essentially relegate the mass production system to a bygone era. So it's always my belief that we need to rebuild the labor movement tailored to the existing structures that are there in the economic system now. And I don't have an answer, but one thing is really bringing all of this to a head, and it's been touched on here, but not adequately. We are on the brink in the auto industry in this country of having an auto industry predominantly involving a precarious workforce. I have 36 years in the St. Catharines General Motors operations. Our illustrious in-plant leadership has negotiated an agreement with the company that gives them unlimited right to hire what are called supplemental workforce employees throughout the remainder of our collective agreement, which runs up to 2016. So there are going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of precarious workers in the plant in St. Catharines, and a similar dynamic is at work at Oshawa. Indeed, everybody's excited that the Oshawa plant's been extended for 2 years. Well, that's half of the picture. The other half of the picture is that the workforce needs created by the extension are going to be filled by supplemental workers. So, as I said, we're now faced with the prospect of an auto industry in this country increasingly, and perhaps over time, predominantly employing precarious workers. And that is really going to be, that is the challenge which is going to bring all of this to a head, and which is going to compel us to figure out how to organize anew, given such a workforce, and given the fact that the existing structures are rotten past the point of no return.
Thanks, Bruce.
I mean, and just to kind of give you an amen, man, I mean, you got to reckon. I mean, like, seriously, like, the majority of workers now are non-union, right? In all sectors. So we're all precarious. Everyone's scared. Everyone's worried about their economic livelihoods being ripped away from them and their families, right? And so people have to see the labor movement as a way to overcome that fear, as having strength in solidarity. And yeah, it's rough, man. Thanks for your comments.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Lindsay Hinshelwood, and I'd like to say I am now the most outspoken critic of the CAW in uniform. I've been in the workforce 35 years. I turned, actually longer, because I worked as a child. I earned income as a child. And I've always been a victim of concessions. So when I started to hear the same rhetoric once again, and the same pattern, and I felt I was being lied to, I started to speak out. And fortunately, I had a lot of people in this room who gave me a lot of information and made me the outspoken person that I am. I was a bit disappointed at the convention because it was a lot of extravaganza, and we weren't really talking about our issues, but that's what conventions are. So I was very pleased that very many delegates, primarily from the CEP, because I think they felt it was a takeover, speak out on the issues. I focused on the youth because I believe that high youth unemployment and that high percentage of low-wage part-time workers is much higher than we want to acknowledge, and no one's talking about any solutions here. And I'm not convinced. I'd like to hear everyone in the labor movement be more critical of their unions. And now the Unifor is siding with Enbridge on the pipeline, so it's not just our economy, it's our environment too. And I really fear I'm not convinced there's a future in the auto industry. I think very soon we could all be that second-tier supplemental worker because the baby boomers are retiring here. So I hope we can be more critical and hold people accountable for what they've done, because, as I said, 35 years have been a victim of concessions. I don't think I'm going to have the pension I'm expecting to have, and the youth just, I don't know if they'll ever retire. But thanks.
Hi, I'm Ron Lair, UAW Local 600 Ford Rouge Plan retiree. I left a couple of written materials back where Sheila's sitting, and one of them is copies of labor notes, and I'd like to read something from part of an article If you joined the UAW at Volkswagen in Chattanooga, here's what you sign in order to join the union. I'm just going to read a couple sentences from it. We recognize that our job security and success as employees are bound up with the success of the company. We commend and embrace the Volkswagen philosophy of co-determination and aim to contribute to the production of the highest quality products, safe and efficient production methods, and the overall profitability of Volkswagen. We choose to be represented by the UAW because by working together, we can make the Passat the #1 car in the United States. So that's what you're signing in order to join the union. This shows one aspect of the contradictions we faced in the UAW. Another is represented by the leaflets from Detroit Eviction Defense that I put on the table. And my union local has played a very positive role in this. But we're trying to keep people from being thrown out of their houses because they can't pay their mortgages. But if you cut the pay of new hires from $28 down to $15 an hour, there's no homes in the future of the working class. So that shows some of the contradictions we face. But the reason I'm really here is I wanted to, way back in the early days when I was in Students for a Democratic Society, we said, vote in the street, vote with your feet. And I wanted to vote with my feet for this meeting because I think our situation is just as bad as Sam Gindin says in what he writes. And if we have a future, it's the kind of cross-border solidarity that this meeting represents. So I just wanted to come up here and say that and, you know, say you guys should keep it up. I just wanted to support these brothers in coming here to speak and the people who came with them. I want to see one big caucus or movement or whatever you want to call it across the borders between dissidents in the CAW and the UAW and other unions. As Sean says, we should ignore the borders in labor organizing.
One at Rio Tinto, and I think there are some real lessons because we try and examine. Our workers are fighting, steelworkers are fighting, but we're losing, and what are we going to do to win? And I think a lot of the things that you guys are saying are really important because Rio Tinto, third largest multinational in the world, had a plant, has them all over the world, in Alma, Quebec, locked out 800. They knew it was coming. A lot of organizing going on in those 800. It's a small community in northern Quebec. They also had a left leadership. Quebec Solidaire, which is a socialist organization in Quebec, some of their leadership was from that. They organized amongst themselves and in their community. So when they were locked out, it was a very strong sense of fight back amongst them. Our union did not respond in the sense that, in the way they wanted, they demanded it. But because they were up where they were, they did a lot by themselves, and they could do a lot by themselves. And it was a long lockout, but there was a lot of solidarity. And one thing about the CAW, your plant in Kitimat, same company, they gave $60,000 a month out of their own wages to help sustain the strike in Alma, Quebec. So it's that kind of solidarity. They also demanded of the union that they fight internationally with all the Rio Tinto outlets around and plants around the world, mines, etc. We went there twice, 13-hour trip back and forth. It was the time of the Quebec student movement. In that time, everything was going on. Occupy wasn't too far in the distant past. And because of the rank and file organizing that had been going on in that plant, they were able to push through the attempts to have them go back to work early. And they won. They won where there were no concessions. There were no concessions because of what they were asking for. The company wanted all new hires to be contract, precarious, at half the wages, half the benefits, no pension at all. That's what they wanted, and they were able to fight it back. And then when they got back and Kitimat went into negotiations, they were able to fight back negotiations. And then another Rio Tinto mine on the north shore of the St. Lawrence, they were going up to negotiations, and they were able to fight back concessions as well. I mean, it was a long contract, too long. But I think that basic solidarity, that basic rank and file stuff you're talking about in the workplace, engaging with others in the same companies and beyond, engaging with the community, engaging with the student movement that was going on. That's what led, I think, to the victory. And I think those are the lessons, so we can do it. It's tough out there, but we can do it. And I think Chicago teaches exactly the same method. So thank you.
My name is Tim Heffernan. I'm a retired teacher and member of OSSTF, and for the American Brothers, that's Ontario's Secondary School Teachers Federation. And I want to take up the issue of the labour bureaucracy and the point, I think it was Bruce Allen who made it, that I would consider a tad extreme, in that the situation is so bad that we have to start anew in terms of organising again. I don't know if you meant outside the union structure or what, but I think there are lessons in different parts of the world to indicate that all is not lost with the official trade union structures, and that they can, in certain circumstances, be taken back by the rank and file. And I'm not in love with my own union. I mean, I've had my problems with OSSTF this past summer. In fact, they had a conference at the Sheraton Hotel, and I'd only been in there 5 minutes, and I was escorted out of the premises. My union leadership had got the impression that I was there to disrupt the conference, and I in fact was banned from there. So I'm not a great fan of my union leadership. And those of you who followed politics over the summer would know that the former president of OSSTF, Ken Karan, the day after he retired from his tenure in that position, jumped ship and became a candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party. Indeed. Anyway, the point I want to make, people have mentioned Chicago Teachers Union, as if you like, a beacon, something that has stood out against all the bad stuff that has been going on. But the lesson of Chicago is that the leadership of that union just didn't suddenly emerge. There was a fight to transform that organization. And there was an organized group called CORE, C-O-R-E, which stands for the Caucus of Rank and File Educators. And 4 or 5 years ago, with 4 or 5, 6 people, they started off and started organizing and gradually built up support. They got to the stage where they ran as an organized platform for the leadership of the CTU, won it, and then prepared themselves for what they knew as the onslaught, the strike that would be coming. And they, in terms of democratic control in their union, they reduced the pay of the full-timers. They hired specific, what they called organizers for the union, to go out into the schools and into the communities to build community teacher support. It was a totally different type of union leadership, what many would call a social justice kind of union leadership rather than a business type of union leadership. And I think if we accept that that is a possibility and not just an aberration, a one-off, then I think what happened in Chicago could be a model for what happens in other unions. Admittedly, I'm not familiar with the auto industry. I don't know all the kinds of struggles you've gone through and the frustrations you've gone through, but I think it would be a mistake at this stage to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yes. To speak, thank you. I'm going to grab it.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm not very happy about it, but I seem to be, with apologies if I'm wrong, the only racialized person here. Maybe all my other friends are sleeping. I take the responsibility. But anyways, let me go on with my question. Thank you very much for very stimulating and unsettling comments, which I need to be voiced out like that. My question is about solidarity. We have in Canada, as I'm sure you have in the States, this pool of cheap migrant labor, mostly precarious, mostly racialized, mostly women. My question is, how do our unions approach these communities of workers in a way that goes beyond the concept of let's tap into them so we can grow our union? Many of us feel insulted how can our union actually see that the global labor migration is bad not only for migrant workers, it's bad for the unions. For as long as you have this cheap, permanent pool of rotating laborers, who needs a union? So this is a place for international solidarity. I'm not asking the unions to help and advocate and organize migrant workers. I'm asking that the unions see them as workers first, who happen to be migrants. Because in the first place, they are workers looking for jobs outside their country. Well, Harper here wants every worker in Canada to go further away from their place, right? And accept lower wages. The fight against global capital actually is joined on the issue of global labor migration. A related question. I come from the Philippines. I grew up in the Philippines, been here 30 years in Canada. Back there, when they say progressive union, they mean a union who actually struggles for all workers, for every social justice issue, not just for their members.
I'm Dave. I'm from CUPE. I just have a couple of quick comments and a quick question. I think
Can
one
we
of
ask you what CUPES is? That was a hamburger.
Canadian Union of Public Employees. I just one of the other people who had a question talked about how can we do this? How can we start to build in our unions to build strength? It was a very good mechanical, practical question, and I wanted to just build on that and talk about. I think it was I forget your name in the red. Scott. You talked about how you pamphleted while you were building up to resist the sort of concessions in your second round of contracts. And then that was successful, but then one of the lessons that you learned was we needed to build outside of our plant, outside of to the other plants. And I just wanted to, I was hoping you all could elaborate on the need for rank and file like press or rank and file resources to talk to each other, because one of the problems I think when we talk about this sort of cross-border solidarity, we don't even have solidarity between our unions from below. We don't have solidarity within Canada. Like, we don't even really know and can connect those movements. And just the role of a press, an independent newspaper, website. I'm part of a modest group, rankandfile.ca, that is trying to do that, but it's pretty small potatoes. Someone brought up a copy of Labor Notes. I thought that was interesting. So I was wondering if you could talk about how that would play a role.
A couple of questions. One would be around, you talked about the centrality of fighting in the workplace. I very much strongly support that and agree with it. How do you do that at the same time when you know that the workplaces really are vulnerable? And so I mean, I'm just thinking of like what happened in Caterpillar here. Is that the brother talked about the demands of cutting 50%, and on paper the union opposed it, and they didn't really try to take the place over and actually make this into a political struggle at the same time they're defending the interests of the workers there. And we asked them, they said that what they're really concerned with is making sure people get severance and stuff like that, which is important. But the workers there, when you talk to the workers who were involved in the battles, and some of those people actually were, this was a GM plant originally, Caterpillar. They're people that I used to work with in the General Motors van plant here in my area and stuff. They were afraid of what's going to happen to their longer term pension things and stuff. How do you actually, what ways do you think of combining workplace power, fighting on the shop floor against all the issues you talked about, at the same time with building something, and it isn't just a question of numbers, it's a question of a political analysis of what should happen to these workplaces? First question. And second is that, I think what Sean talked about international solidarity being critical. Do Do you not think that at the same time, though, that local and sort of national capacities are sort of like the input for the international solidarity? Without that input, and so, for example, if a place is going to be closed, it's one thing. If there's a threat to close a place or a threat to attack the workers in a particular place, it's really important to get support internationally. But don't you also need to do, like, I think what Greg talked about, how the, like Occupy, parks and stuff, and a lot of labor leaders says, boy, that's inspiring, but they didn't occupy their workplaces. Also, it means, and I keep on thinking of the examples I can think of, at least in the CAW examples, that they allowed places to close without trying to take them over and saying, look, let's make this workplace do something else for us. What can it happen? And places like Windsor, for example, are a place where that hasn't happened. So anyway, those kinds of things, and I'm not sure that it happens all that much in the US either.
A North American working class, in which we include the Canadians, the Americans, and the Mexican working class in a common strategy, because that's, in the end, that's the future. So we're slowly, in a very hesitant way, beginning that process. That's the importance of this meeting to me. I would just like to say there's always a danger when the left gets together. It tends to stick all the problems on the agenda at the same time for discussion. And that's part of the problem of its separation and its disparate character. There's no continuity, so we can set things to the side for discussion later on to discuss immediate issues. So we have to find a way where we can talk. The other thing that tends to happen when we get together is they can turn into, and I'm giving my age away when I say this, they can turn into speak bitterness meetings where we moan and groan. And that, of course, is not the character of this. We are dealing with real solutions here. But we also have to keep in mind important things taking place of a positive character that can take us forward. Because we have to, first of all, we have to remember that the working class at the present stage is at a low level of class consciousness. And we can beat our gums to pulp about that problem, but not get anywhere. We have to understand the reality within which we work. Otherwise, we will exhaust ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be frustrated. Otherwise, we will lose cadre. So the important thing in a period such as we're in is how do we stay together? I think that's very important. One of the things and so we have to look at some positive things. I just threw a couple of things out. For instance, the CAMI plant in its last agreement, its last contract, got rid of the two-tier system.
No, got rid of the SW. The supplemental workers it got rid of, not two-tier.
Oh, they didn't. I'm sorry. I just read the newspaper. No, well, where there's progress on that front, and we can make this key, we have to highlight it. That's the point I'm trying to make. Where there's progress, we have to zero in on it. Because we as a left, and I speak here, in this special period we're in, must cast our nets widely and not be too interested in differentiating ourselves from each other. We have to look where we can find common ground, where we can get together. There's one initiative here, which I'm surprised wasn't in the city of Toronto, which I'm surprised hasn't been mentioned, and I will mention it, and that is the Toronto Labour Council. Toronto and District Labour Council has undertaken a very important initiative where it's demanding the CLC and the OFL begin a campaign against the right to work for less legislation that's coming in. Because the employers here are emulating everything you have in the United States. We see our future, if it's not already here. This legislation is real. This Tory government, we see it already in with its attitude to the public service sector. This is on the agenda, and the Labour Council, to its credit, has been trying to organise that. Organise a campaign to get the labour movement to devote some resources to that campaign to educate. And really, we should be doing something in our locals, get resolutions passed in the locals, picking that up. That's a little positive stroke, a very important one. So it's within that spirit I welcome the brothers here, and I think we should find a way of continuing these kinds of discussions, if only for an exchange of information, if only for that. Thank you very much.
Of CAW, now Unifor, and also IATSE. I found interesting the information that come out of this, and I think that this is an answer to some of the problems we are presented with. When I've brought forward information in labor disputes that I was involved in, fear was the biggest factor of all the people. They're going to close the plant. I've been through several plant closings. And we must accept these concessions, otherwise we're going to bury the corporation. And that, in fact, is a lie. You're being posed. The corporations are more healthy than they've ever been. And with information like this brought forward to other workers, people in our situation, we will help fight back this two-tiered nonsense. And further comment on that, if we could bring forward information to the economic benefits of improving the minimum wage, getting rid of this two-tier, you would have economic expansion like you wouldn't believe. And that's what the companies are looking for. And if you could sell it to the workers, give them information, give them the truth, because they're certainly not getting it from the media in general. That's all. Thank you.
My name is Rob Fairley. I'm currently working with the Labour Council in Toronto, as that Ernie mentioned. And I just want to flag in terms of an urgent task, Ernie mentioned it, in terms of organizing on the ground. Ontario could be a right-to-work jurisdiction within a matter of months, and the response to the labour movement has in no way been adequate to this challenge to date. There's some good work being done, but if there's a role for the left right now on the ground, it is to demand that there be, that this fight back be taken into the workplace and be the top priority of the movement right now. To the best of my knowledge, there may be one or two people in the labor movement working full-time on this right now, which is astonishing. Astonishing. And so whatever the limitations of our movement today, there's no question that it would be a setback of historic proportions for the labor movement, for the anti-capitalist movement, if Ontario became a right-to-work jurisdiction. So the Labour Council put forward a resolution to the Ontario Federation of Labour, which really challenges a series of questions, really challenges the labour movement to reflect on the status of its fight back on this issue. And there's an astonishing level of sleepwalking, rote behavior, and castle gazing going on right now. Oh, you know, they might be backing off on this one or moving forward on that one. So I believe that the movement can be rebuilt under fire. I think it's the kind of time when we do rebuild. It's not, these things aren't mechanical kinds of processes that separate, that exist separate from one another. So I think it's possible to renew the movement under this attack. But it's increasingly clear that there's got to be pressure from below to make this happen, because the focus of the leadership in too many cases is simply not there.
Have there been many resolutions passed in local supporting the Labour Council?
I'm not up to date, but you know, if there have been locals that have endorsed that resolution as well, and so if you're in a local that could endorse that, you can get that resolution from the Labour Council. Thank you.
I've been a member of CAW Local 707 for the last 26 years. And You've seen the ups and downs, what's going on in the labor movement. But one thing I am seeing is that we need to start focusing on one issue, because what I'm seeing a shopping list today on all kinds of things happening here. Like no one's even talking about how bad free trade's going on. No one's even talking about the deal that Canada signed on with the EU not too long ago, a couple of days ago. That's going to be dramatic effects to our economy. The right to work states, the Tea Party movement was risen out of all the frustration that was going on in the states. Look at what damage the free tea parties have done to Michigan in particular. What I think we need to do is get political. One way or another, we have to get political. We have to get political on the shop floor. We have to get political with our governments, and that's what's not happening. And you look what's going on when you talk about the movement, the Occupy movement. Well, the U.S. government attacked those people. The U.S. government started coming at those people. Obama focused in on those people. And Obama was supposed to be the person that's supposed to save the workers, and he destroyed that movement, I believe. And now it's been so disbanded. What we do is we need people to starting one thing at a time, just starting once. If we're going to do an action on the shop floor, start it. You guys did a great job in Chicago. I know many of the people who work in Chicago as well too. But this forum is a great forum to have. It comes down to leverage as well too. One Ford plant in Oakville in Canada isn't going to help things. But many plants in the United States that are Ford plants will help things. One GM plant and 2 GM plants in Canada isn't going to do much. Just like us moving from the UEW to the CEW, it was right at the right time. And there isn't much, there's discussions back and forth between our leaders and your leaders, but they don't want to withhold their grip. Bruce is right. Unifor is bureaucratic. It's become even more bureaucratic now since we've merged. There's more levels of bureaucracy with what they've agreed to. Getting elected into conferences and conventions, they've cut that in half. You could have, for example, one local would have 12 delegates. Now they've worked it out to a maximum of 6, maybe 7. That's not democratic. But did they give us that opportunity to really talk about that at the conventions we had? No, there was no discussions on it. It was just basically take it, merge or not merge. There was no this page, that page. So those sort of things in the apparatus of unions have changed dramatically. But what I do say is thank you again for coming here. Hopefully we'll have a beer and talk about some stuff that's going on. Greg, I used some of your articles in my degree at Mac too, so I'm going to plagiarize a little bit. No, you never know. But I had some fun with it, along with it. And
I'm all for it. And
the end of the day is we just got to keep on fighting. You don't stop. Don't get discouraged. I'll tell you, on the shop floor, there is a lot of, they've lost hope. They have lost hope in everything. They don't want to fight. A person will be fighting. You're talking about people that are getting work out on their jobs. People are getting hurt in the jobs. People are I believe, dying on the lines these days. There are more heart attacks I've been seeing in the workplaces. It's out of control in my workplace. I think we've had about 7 or 8 people die of a heart attack in the last year and a half in Oakville because of the intensification of the work process. And the problem is our guys will go to the union and they'll tell the union leadership, hey, look, why don't you try this angle? Why don't you try that angle? An hour later, the management will come down and say, oh, you talked about this, did you? Instead of trying to fight it, they're working in tandem too, which is frustrating as beyond belief.
Thank you. I'm Edie Strahan. I'm with OPSU, Ontario Public Service Employees Union. We're primarily a public sector union, but we do some broader public sector work as well. I'm very fortunate. I'm involved with my Labour Council. They save my butt all the time. The campaign that they have going on is awesome. In OPSU, we just released a video called Made in the USA. The video contains an OPSU version with Smokey talking for an extra minute and a half at the end, and we have a labor-friendly version that anybody is welcome to use. And I know it's not the answer, but it is a tool, and I have about 15 of them in my Jeep. I'm more than willing to bring them in and share them. It's available online. Help yourselves. The other comment I want to make is that, we're working at this 24/7. What we really need are politicians that are working at this 24/7. We've got a lot of elections coming up, and we need to be electing the right people, and I think we need to be focused on that too, and that's my minute.
We can't just try harder and give ourselves, pep talks. We really have to think about doing things differently, and I think we have to take a couple of things seriously. One is, when we start talking about forming links across the border, Canada and the US, we don't have them in Canada. We don't have them within the Ford system in terms of the engine plant and the Windsor engine plant and the Oakville plant. We don't have them within GM. So, here's a project. Let's actually start doing it instead of talking about it. We've got people here. Let's establish these links across plants in Canada and make sure that we include the Americans in them and start having some actual physical exchanges where we can meet. It's not that hard to meet in Windsor or Detroit. When we get excited about something like Wisconsin, DeCarlo has always said this when he was in the CAW. Most of what happens to us is at best going to be a partial victory. We aren't going to win things within capitalism generally. So the question is, what do we learn so we can keep building? So when we look at Wisconsin, it's incredibly inspiring, but then it faded away. And we can't just say, well, the leadership screwed up and they channeled it all into the Democrats or into the legal system. That's all true. The question is, what could we have done differently? Or do we just wait for another Wisconsin and get disappointed again? If we would have had some kind of a workers' assembly in Madison, some place where workers could get together, not just the organized workers, the unorganized community groups, to actually say, what are we facing and how do we struggle? Now, you might not have been able to reverse what the union leadership was able to do, but we could have built, we could have recruited, we could have said, let's get ready for the next fight. The same with the Chicago teachers. It's incredibly inspiring to see what they did. What they did was amazing, but then 50 schools closed. So what could we have done to prevent that? Because we lost. 50 schools closing is a loss. What needed to happen was to talk about schools as public spaces, especially in those poor neighborhoods and those poor communities that are places where there are health clinics, where there is adult education going on, where there's child care, where you fix your furniture, where it does all those things. And then we would have had to be ready to take over some schools, because otherwise we'd just be talking about it. So we have to think about those things. Now, when you start thinking about all those things, it raises what Bruce raised. Are unions going to do this? Are unions going to do this even if we had better leadership? It is very difficult. The Chicago teachers are isolated within their own union. They're isolated from the rest of the labor movement in Chicago. How do you form those larger links? And to do that, you need some larger organizations. You need organizations that have their feet inside the union and outside the union. Something that just goes beyond this model of, these are the members we represent. And if we have those larger organizations, maybe we can both find new ways of struggling, but also have a way of renewing the unions. So we don't, as Tim was saying, just give up on them. And I think these are things that we have to, we're not going to solve them, obviously, just here, but we really have to think about them. So, everything about the emphasis on class, the emphasis on mobilization, this is fundamental. If we don't have resistance, nothing else happens. But we have to go beyond that. One of the things we've been doing in Toronto, we've been trying to form this Toronto Assembly. Part of that has a labor committee. The labor committee in it has been relatively successful of late. We'd really like anybody who's interested, sign up. Let's start doing these things. Let's form cells, groups in all unions and start organizing people across unions, not just to have a caucus. So our head is into, how do we fix just our union outside of the rest of the working class? And I want to raise one final thing, which is so difficult. Herman raised it about, it is so difficult in the private sector to be fighting when the main thing that people are concerned about is jobs, and when unions don't have much to offer on jobs. That's not what unions do. Now, as soon as you pose that question, you have to start thinking about taking on corporate power. If we don't take on corporate power, we can't deal with that. And to take on corporate power, again, begins to raise a question of, what kind of organization do we need to take on corporate power? How would we organize ourselves to do that? These are the kind of questions we have to think about. We have to start thinking about how we organize ourselves at the community level, across class, across the community, across workplaces, and then how we start building that in other communities. We're having some discussions with Philadelphia about Philadelphia wanting a workers' assembly. So, I mean, this was wonderful. I really want to thank everybody. It was terrific. It was great. Sorry. This was wonderful. Yes, I was just going to say that. Ernie. It was really terrific. They obviously are going to get the last word. But I did want to emphasize that we really like to encourage people to join and sign up at the table for the Labor Committee so we can really start doing something.
And buy the book.
Hi, thanks again, everybody. A couple of last thoughts. I was an organizer before I worked for General Motors, and one of the things they taught us as organizers was you want easy, tangible victories because they give you a sense of relief and accomplishment. So sometimes it's not about, overthrowing capitalism and having a huge general strike and taking over the world. Sometimes it's just about having a bunch of people wearing shirts on the same day. And if you can get a couple hundred people doing that, it feels pretty freaking good. You know what I'm saying? And if you keep it up, it builds a culture of unionism, a broader culture where being an activist is normal. Because ultimately we're talking about broader cultural change, right? Because if we want to move away from capitalism, we got to get rid of all this cultural garbage that's associated with it. Again, everyone's mentioned this before, community support, obviously key. Sit-down strike, could not have done it without the Emergency Women's Brigade, without huge community support, without, everyone in the community out there singing Solidarity Forever in the streets, shutting the whole city down. We have to, that's what's worked in the past, that's what's going to work now. We have to come together as the 99%. And that's really accurate, right? The 99%, I love that language because it's not exclusive to union, non-union, unemployed, whatever. It's everybody coming together as a class, right? How are we going to do this cross-border communication? Obviously, we got the internets, people, Facebook, email, all that stuff. Come on, look me up. My name's Sean Crawford, S-E-A-N Crawford. You know what I'm saying? Let's talk, whatever, right? And also, we have to organize around our issues. Everyone's got something that pisses them off, right? Whatever gets your goat, whatever makes you passionate, that's what you got to talk to your fellow workers on. And so I want to ask, if we are trying to be on the same page, I have a question for you. What are our common issues? We have to talk about this probably some other time over some beers afterwards because I'm hungry and thirsty. Let's get this done. But what are our common issues? We got to figure this out so we can start working together on something tangible and achievable. And also, I'm just curious, are there any good international publications that exist anymore? Do you guys know of any? I'm not sure. Let's talk about this. So thanks, everybody.
I'm really enthusiastic about international communication. The brother brought up about the labor press. We have labor notes that's been really great. We have Autoworker Caravan that I'm involved in. It's not a press, it's a network that works together throughout the UAW, and the CAW or Unifor is welcome to join us. We have regular conference calls where we talk about issues. So if you're interested in that, come and see me afterwards. We'll exchange email addresses. But I think the important thing, and Sean touched on this, is communication. We need to stay in communication with each other. We have the internet. That's something that we didn't have before when we were going through these struggles. Facebook, I'm not very good at Facebook, but I can't put an article like that on Facebook. It's just too big. But websites like Soldiers of Solidarity, it was a great source for me when I was trying to organize my thoughts so that I could put them out to the membership. It is that communication that is going to make us stronger, and we need to continue that. We need to continue this. Thank you.
I want to thank the Steelworkers for opening the hall to us, and Toronto's Workers Assembly for inviting us and providing this, and Ernie Tate and Jess McKenzie especially for their aid. And hospitality, You know, I've been working on a really long essay concerned with these. You heard part of it today, but now you've given me so much more fodder. I'd like to bring up some practical ideas about, and try to condense some of these ideas. We're talking about cross-border and distribution and you know, linking people together. You know, like you said, you can download this information. And live bait and ammo was, I intentionally wrote that, or you know, in the beginning, just to my coworkers, and I passed it out in my local. And then it got on the internet and started to move around, and people would download it, print it out, and distribute it in their plants. I always wrote with that in mind, so I didn't write on 11 by 14 paper. I always wrote on ideally on one side, but I'm a little long-winded, but so they could fit on one piece of paper, and workers would take it to the company copy machine, and they would run it off at the company's expense, which is why I took a union bug off it, because that would be a violation, you know, and I started putting labor donated. But you have to consider, you know, if you want to distribute and get it out more broadly and internationally. And I heard, you know, Canadians saying they read live bait and ammo. Well, I didn't begin to write for Canadians, but it became available. And then it was important, too, that people printed it out. And I think, you know, even in this day and age, that the paper copy is very important, because you hand it to someone, and that's a connection. And you talk to them about it. To go on with that in distribution, I never ask anybody to do anything too far beyond their comfort zone. So I would have some live bait and ammos, I would give it to a worker and say, could you pass these out in your department, in the tool room, you know, whatever. They felt safe doing that. Once they did that, they might be willing to do a little more. But again, this broadened the outreach. It wasn't just me. It was all these different workers passing it out to people that they knew personally. And the most significant thing I got out of CORE, the Chicago Teachers Union, was that, well, in the beginning, it was socialists that reformed that union and started it. And most of the people that got into CORE after that may have not been socialists or communists, but many of them have since turned. But they went door to door. They knocked on doors and talked to not just individual teachers, people in the neighborhood. It was personal, it was face to face. And that's the important part, I think, of paper. Another thing that I did in a very low time in the United States was right after George Bush was elected for the second time. Very, very demoralizing. Plus, I was working at Delphi, and they had instituted the second-tier contract. Very demoralizing. I was on the e-board, and I was on the education committee. So I started this education committee. Well, the first thing I did is I went to different people to get them to join. And I said, you're a reader. I see you're reading all the time. You know, I would like you to contribute. Just bring in some of the things that you read and share them with this committee. So I got workers from every department in the plant. So every department, different ethnicities, men, women, trades, production, everybody. I had probably 12, 15 people on an education committee. And all I asked them to do was to bring in something that they'd read lately, that they thought the members should read. And I said, none of this bullshit about vote for Democrats, but just something educational about the economy, unions, society, you know. And they did this. Well, then we met, not after work, because they don't have time to do that. The union couldn't afford to pay them. So we met on the lunch hour. Now, this was convenient in that the union didn't have to pay them. It was convenient for them as for time, but for me, the important thing was management saw them. They saw 10, 15 people sitting down together talking and exchanging information, and there's nothing that the bosses fear more than workers getting together. And we would always take a long lunch, and they didn't mess with us. They let us do it. Now, the workers would bring in this information, we would read it, we would discuss it, and we would decide, okay, which one shall we select and staple together and pass out to the membership. So I developed this, first of all, I'm appealing to their intelligence and asking them to bring in something of their choice, getting them to work together. And I'm getting people from all different areas of the plant, and they become the distribution network. Now, we were the second shift, so I asked them, now you have to connect with one other person on the other shift. If you can make a connection with a person on the first shift and a person on the third shift, to ask them to submit articles, to give us information, and to be a distributor. So I organized a committee that looked like this, vertically and horizontal. Shortly thereafter, the Delphi bankruptcy erupted. We got rid of the education paper and we started the Work to Rule committee. And we had this inside information that we could distribute. We had our network. That's how we organized to distribute. Another thing was we talk about immigration issues and identity issues. And I think that this is one place where the left got atomized, you know, really broken up. To me, what unifies us is that we're workers. And you're absolutely right. You know, immigrants should be identified first as human beings and then as workers. When we allow one class of person, one worker to be referred to as illegal, then all workers are outlaws. And America has a very ugly tradition of making a certain group second class or less than human. It's really ugly. But the best place to get integration and unification is in the union. The unions were integrated before the churches were. And in fact, we don't have integrated churches in the United States. We don't. We have integrated unions. Now, as a clear and simple example, I worked in Coopersville, Michigan, a farm community. An awful lot of the workers were from rural communities. Unlike me, they didn't grow up in a city, and I was exposed to a lot of African Americans especially. They weren't. And so really it was working in that factory was their first experience working with African Americans. But when you work side by side with someone, you find out, they're just like me. They have children and they go to church and they like good food, and those barriers broke down very rapidly. Even though we only had maybe 10% of that working population in Coopersville was African American, we had an African American president, an African American vice president. They were on. We had committee members, bargaining committee that were African American. They were in all the leadership in the union. I have never seen so many white men marry African Americans as in that particular factory. It was so many, I couldn't believe it. But it was simple because the union brings people together when you work side by side. You really break down those barriers. And this is where I want to emphasize about identity politics and the importance of unions and concentrating on working class rather than too many other, or that as the solution. And in reference to what Bruce said, I'm with you. I think that the UAW is too far gone. I think going to a UAW convention and asking them to reform or change is like asking the executioner for a cigarette. Yes, he'll give you a cigarette and it'll even be one of your own brand because he confiscated your pack. But we're going to have to tear the gallows down. And having said that, I saw what you did and Lindsay did. And you didn't get booed like they got booed when they tried to nominate Gary Walkowitz in the UAW. You were allowed to present that uninterrupted. Lindsay, and I know you guys had to struggle to get there, But she got, what, 20, 25%? 17? Okay, 17%. I don't think Gary got one. 17% is respectable. And if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, she got it from the young people. She got it from the people coming in. And again, I find that encouraging, because us gray hairs are on our way out. And they stuck together. They voted, and they were not afraid. In the UAW delegate, in their conventions, it's a very intimidating atmosphere. People are really afraid to cast a vote like that. So, perhaps it is possible. Some unions more likely than others. But the UAW they not only make enormous salaries, but they are joined with the companies and collect money directly from the companies. So reforming them is, I just don't think it's going to be possible. The other, and when we talk about closing plants and concessions, I apologize if the United States has strong-armed the Canadian auto workers and Canadian workers in particular with these concessions. And that, like when they closed the Caterpillar plant, that wasn't really a negotiation. When they said take a 50% cut, that's not negotiating. They just put the gun to their head and said get out. Nobody can take a 50% cut. And I think the union understood that it's severance or nothing, because Caterpillar was going to move that plant, and they had a plant in the United States that wasn't even organized. And if it was, the UAW would have taken the work. The UAW has been undermining the Canadian auto workers for way too long. And when we talk about, finally, and I should end, about meetings and getting together, it's important that we do this, I think, physically and personally. You make bonds with people. Something that we did when Delphi declared a bankruptcy, I got these Soldiers of Solidarity meetings. We didn't even call ourselves, we didn't have a name. But I just called for a rank and file meeting, and the first meeting there was maybe 200 people. It was big, it was exciting. But what we did was, we didn't stand in front and give them speeches and tell them to go vote for the Democrats, which is what the UAW did, even though there wasn't an election that year. But we turned the mic over to the audience. A very risky move. But we wanted them to be leaders. We wanted them to be coming up with the ideas. And getting them to go back into their plants, encouraging more and more of this. Well, we can't do this by simply training people or, directing them, this is what you're going to do. They really had to have a sense. And that's where we, work to rule with sense of emphasis for us, because that's power that they had in their own hands. That's something that they could do, and that they did do. Production went down so fast and so far that there was a quick turnaround. They started throwing money at us. That's what bought it out in the end, which was a shame. But so I would encourage that type of meeting where you get, you're going, from into a smaller community and citing, certain factories and inviting that rank and file out to talk to us. Not leftist telling workers what they should do. Workers coming out and telling leftists what they need from us and what can we do. They need, I think, to be the leaders. Thank you.